Salve mates, I hope everything is covered in Tuscan sunshine at your end. Let's pretend you are the Roman Emperor in the year 395. The empire has just been divided between East and West, and unlike historians, you do not accept it. You are going to reunite it. Well, in that case you have three possible strategies. Two of them have been tried before, and both have failed for very specific reasons. The first option is the Constantine Solution, where you rule alone. The dream scenario in which God is on your side. You defeat your rival in a single decisive civil war and you rule alone. It sounds simple, and Roman ideology tells you it should work because the empire is supposed to have one emperor, just as the universe has one God. So you march, you gather the army, you gamble everything on one battle. Think of the Battle of Mursa in 351, where Emperor Constantius II defeated his rival and more than 60,000 Roman soldiers perished in a single day. So even if you win, you have destroyed a generation of manpower that you cannot replace. But let's say you do win. You are now the sole ruler of the entire Roman Empire. This is the moment where the fantasy ends and the administrative reality begins. The empire you have inherited is no longer the empire of Trajan. From the 3rd century onward, it has been reorganized so that it can better prevent civil wars. The key word is fragmentation. Civil governors no longer command armies. The generals who command armies do not control taxation. The tax system that pays the army is run by a different chain of command based in a different regional court. You cannot simply issue an order and expect the whole system to move, because the system has been deliberately designed to prevent any regional commander from having all the tools needed to become you, the emperor. At the same time, the strategic situation means that you cannot personally command everywhere that matters. The Persian Empire requires a permanent, well-funded presence in the east. The Rhine and Danube require mobile armies in the north. If you move the court and the army to one front, the other front becomes a crisis within months. A single emperor can only function if he creates a permanent deputy with the real power. And the moment you create a permanent deputy with the real power, you have created political conditions for a rival emperor. This is why in the century before 395 the empire had a single undisputed ruler for roughly 19 years, and almost all these years belonged to Constantine the Great, a man who destroyed every rival who rose against him, who founded a new capital, a new dynasty and a new Christian empire, and whose life was so improbably successful that it reads less like politics and more like the biography of a man the Romans would once have called the Son of God. If you doubt the improbability of the success, look at Justinian in the 6th century, who attempted to reunite the Roman Empire and only ended up with destroying Italy for generations while going bankrupt. So the first option, rule alone, requires you to win a civil war that cripples your own army, and then to be physically present in multiple theaters at once while controlling administrative structures that were built to stop you from concentrating power. In other words, it requires Constantine. And you are not Constantine. The second option is what I would call Constantius Experiment. You accept that the empire is too large for one man and you try to solve the problem by appointing the right colleague and keeping him loyal. This looks sensible, but in practice it is a collection of disasters. Constantius II is the emperor who tries all the experiments to achieve this. He begins with ideal dynastic arrangement, ruling with brothers. One ends up dead in a civil war, the other is murdered by a usurper. The usurper, number 1, is then defeated by Constantius in another civil war. The usurper, number 2, is then forced to resign. The emperor then tries the family solution again and appoints his cousin Gallus to rule in the east. Gallus proves that an incompetent and brutal emperor is just as dangerous as an ambitious one, because misrule creates revolts, so Gallus is executed by Constantius. The next attempt of Constantius, this time in the west, is Julian, who is competent, loyal, and militarily successful, which turns out to be even worse because a successful Western commander with the loyalty of the army is distinguishable from a new Augustus, and Julian is proclaimed emperor by his own troops. But Constantius wasn't the only emperor conducting experiments. Theodosius the Great himself went through the same cycle. He defeated the Western usurper Magnus Maximus and restored the legitimate Western Emperor Valentinian II. And then 4 years later he found out that the West is lost again to another usurper and had to be reconquered at enormous cost. Every version of the co-emperor solution produces the same problem. If your colleague is weak, someone replaces him. If he's strong, he replaces you. If he's not your relative, you get a military usurpation. The rule of 4 emperors, the Tetrarchy, tried to solve this with a system of arranged succession and collapsed immediately after the first generation. 2 emperors ruling together works only when one of them has the military and political strength to dominate the other, which means it is not really cooperation at all. The system does not fail because the individuals are uniquely bad. It fails because the empire now contains multiple complete regional power structures, and any man who controls one of them has a realistic path to your throne. You can keep refighting these wars for the rest of your life, but every time you win, you create the conditions for the next one. Which brings you to the third option, the historical canon one, the one that actually happens in 395, the Elsa option. You let it go. You accept that the empire cannot be run as a single political unit anymore. By the late 4th century, the empire already consists of 2 fully functioning state machines. Each half has its own tax system, its own field army, its own praetorian prefecture, its own court in 2 different capitals, and its own networks of aristocratic patronage. Reunification is no longer just a military victory. It would mean dismantling one entire administrative world and absorbing its elites into the another. That is politically dangerous and economically irrational, especially for the East, which is richer, urbanized, and more defensible, and would gain very little by taking on the West's longer frontiers and weaker tax base. After Theodosius dies, real power in both halves lies with bureaucrats and generals whose careers depend on their own courts. They have no incentive to submit to a distant center. For the Eastern elite, reunification means paying for Western problems. The rational choice is to preserve their own system and maintain the fiction that the Roman Empire is still one. And that fiction is remarkably cheap. Laws are issued in the name of both emperors. Coins show both courts. Unity survives as an ideology even when no longer exists as a reality. So in 395 you make your choice. You can try to be Constantine the Great and exhaust the empire in a civil war that solves nothing. You can try to be his son, Constantius II, and spend your reign creating and destroying junior emperors who inevitably become rivals. Or you can do what history does and accept that the Roman Empire now works as 2 separate states, because the reforms that saved it in the last 200 years also made permanent political division logical. Rome is not divided because someone fails. It is divided because by this point keeping it formally united under one man is more expensive, more dangerous, and less functional. Creating the idea of a united Roman Empire is easy. Actually governing it has become almost impossible. And that is why, if you are the emperor in AD 395, the only strategy that doesn't destroy you is the one that looks like surrender. So mates, this is my take on the 395 split of the Roman Empire. Hope you guys liked it. Let me know in the comments which option would you pick. Would you rule alone? Would you create a co-emperor? Or would you just accept it? Stay strong.